Generics and type parameters. Parameter, you already know what that is. Let's say that we pass in an index here, then you know that the update method takes an integer as a parameter, right? Well, what if you don't want to define that it is an integer? Maybe you don't know if it's a float or an integer yet. The way you can do that is instead of using parentheses, you use a sharp bracket and you say, I want this one to use the data type integer. You of course have to do that when you create the object as well. And you can see you can have both parameters and type parameters at the same time. The way it looks inside the container class, which is called a generic class because it doesn't define its own data type, is that you define the class with the same way, but you use the word to use internally instead of the data type. Instead of writing integer here or writing int here, you write the same t as you used up here. The most common way to use type parameters and to use generic classes is to have containers. For example, this class contains a private field and a public property, so that somebody else can use this container for example, for a vector or for a texture or whatever. That he can define what he wants to use the container for. This is kind of pointless with this example because here you only store one thing. But if you design a bit more advanced class that can store a long list of things, then that's much better. We're going to use such a list later on that will store, instead of storing just one, it will store all the game objects that we have. It doesn't matter if it is the player or an enemy or a bullet or whatever it is. It will store in the same list, because then we can use that list to check for collisions. For example, if a bullet collides with a player or an enemy, they should get some damage from it. So that's a good use for generics, is to have some kind of container. The most common thing is probably a list, but there are other kinds too. They're called dictionaries and arrays and so on, depending on the style that they are storing things in. The first way that we will use generics is to use a list. We're going to have to define that we're going to do a list, and it's going to store rectangles, and in each rectangle is going to be a frame. So our object of the list class will store frames of the rectangle data type, and then we can just use those frames to make an animation. So the process is similar as before. We declare, we instantiate, nothing funky, you just have to have the type parameter there as well. And then the list class has a method called add. So we can add a rectangle to it. We can also remove a rectangle from it. And if we add 10 of these different rectangles, we need a way to be able to access them. And that's what you do with straight brackets. So if you want to get frame number 3, then you just use brackets. They are called an array indexing operator, those brackets. And they are a bit dangerous because they're is no bounds checking. So let's say that you use the add statement, you add method, you call it 10 times and put 10 rectangles in there, and then here you type 15, then your program is going to crash. So you need to make sure in your code that you are checking yourself that you are within bounds before you use the array indexing operator. Okay? Let's make an animation.